A new Animal Crossing is coming out, and that means we're having the same discussions as always about Tom Nook, the little trickster raccoon who sells you the home in which you hang out, make friends, and collect stuff. Is he your friend or a vicious loan shark? Is he a capitalist? Is he a landlord? These are, seemingly, the only questions anyone knows how to ask about Animal Crossing. What is Tom Nook's role, and how can we map our existing political conflicts onto him? And this is all pretty boring. I could do a video on those, but let's be fair. It would be a short video and it wouldn't say anything new. Nook's not a landlord, he's a builder. He's not really a capitalist because his only employees are his kids, and he's not a loan shark because he doesn't charge interest and he doesn't even trick you into taking loans anymore. This is mostly a result of Animal Crossing being a low-stakes, largely conflict-free game. Does it really matter if Nook is a capitalist if everyone in the Animal Crossing world has their basic needs met and no one has to work for a living? Can he really even be considered a loan shark in a world without violence, in which money is only a means to buy cute furniture? Most of the discussion around Tom Nook really boils down to trying to have political debates around a cute children's game that goes out of its way to create a world in which politics doesn't exist. Nah, I'm just kidding. Animal Crossing, the children's game of carefree relaxation and chill summer days, is a deeply political game in the status quo it presents and the types of relations it models. Just because we can't model certain debates over the structure of a game doesn't make it apolitical. It just means that the game's political statements are ones you take for granted. By providing us with a chill, conflict-free experience, one that seeks not to challenge us, Animal Crossing reveals what we think the status quo to be, what ideas we find so normal that we cease to register them as political. Animal Crossing's worldview, in which you are the human mayor of a little town, or in the new game, a little island, full of cute animals, is like a tiny Garden of Eden. And I mean that in the most literal sense, in that you are the only human being there tasked with governing over the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky, given free and generous usage of your village's fruit trees, surrounded by a cast of creatures who adore and obey you. The series didn't start this way. In the first Animal Crossing, you weren't the mayor, your villagers could be a little cranky sometimes or kind of be jerks to you. Nook himself was a bit of a devious trickster. But over time, the series has softened, has focused more on being a game you can chill with, something gentle and welcoming. They've even minimized the role of series icon Mr. Resetti, the mole who screams at you if you reset without saving, because he's scared children too much. None of this is bad, none of it's amoral. Animal Crossing New Leaf was one of my favorite games of the last decade, but the result is a series that has gradually changed its quaint little village from one in which you belong into one that belongs to you. And when you combine that with the game's core premise of you being the only human being in a town full of animals, well, it makes a statement. I'm not going to be hunting and eating my villagers anytime soon, but the fact remains that they are animals, I am a human, I exist above them, and they exist to give me pleasure and amusement. There's a whole subgenre of games that exist to be chill. Soothing, repetitive experiences built around getting into a groove, performing self-directed tasks in an open-ended world, usually with only the roughest sketch of a final goal or a path through the game. There's Animal Crossing, but also Stardew Valley, Minecraft, Factorio, Satisfactory, No Man's Sky, and dozens of others within the same framework. Games designed to be low-key, player-driven experiences, ones you can relax with and luxuriate in. These are games designed to feel comforting and familiar, but when you treat them as a genre, that comforting nature reveals something. That what we find familiar, what we find unchallenging, is a worldview that positions human beings as distinct from the world around them, and views the rest of the world as something to be exploited for our gain. Stardew Valley gives you a farm that has fallen into disrepair, but that disrepair manifests itself as a thriving forest the game wants you to clear-cut and replace with more profitable cash crops. In Satisfactory, you are, literally, in the text of the game, a colonist, in the employ of a major corporation, with the goal of building an automated system for the most efficient resource extraction and refinement. Minecraft places you in a world filled with only non-human villagers who construct small houses and positions everything in that world, from its resources to its sentient inhabitants, as existing primarily to provide a point of interaction for you, the player, the only being in the universe who truly matters. And New Horizons, the newest Animal Crossing game, looks to continue this trend towards a worldview in which relaxation and calm means positioning human beings as having a supreme right to and dominion over the rest of the world. The game presents you with a deserted island that you and your villagers settle, rather than giving you a pre-existing village you must integrate yourself into. It will position the player with more ability to direct and control where and how their villagers live. It will allow you more power over the village's commons by placing your furniture and decorations in the public spaces, and, for the first time, it will allow you to change the land itself, digging and building and landscaping so that your island can be exactly how you want it. Tom Nook was never really a landlord, but now you are. The land that used to be commonly held belongs more than ever to you, and you are given right to shape and control it in ways you never had before. In my village in Animal Crossing New Leaf, there was a river that bisected the village, and while we built a couple bridges over it, it still guided my interactions with the world. When I had a friend over, we'd meet up at the train station, head down to my house by the river, walk downstream a ways, hop over the bridge, and then double back upstream to go down the ramp to the beach. A circuitous little path that became familiar over time. With the ability to shape the land, with more control over it, we could have turned that little stroll into a straight line, making the most efficient use of our time, and never having to think about the river, or the trees that grew by it, or the other villagers we ran into. The land that shaped our experience with the game was something immutable and bigger than us that guided us along certain paths. And this increasing anthropocentrism in the name of player convenience threatens to remove that relationship. And the thing is, these value systems, the ones presented as a status quo by these games, are not universal. You don't have to view the land and its non-human inhabitants this way, and many people haven't. There are existing real-world models for a worldview that considers humanity as a co-equal inhabitant of a living system, rather than that system's center or its peak. For one example, as Nick Estes, a citizen of the Lower Brule Sioux tribe, writes in his book Our History is the Future, many indigenous peoples within the Americas view caretaking of the land and its life not as the responsibility of a master, but as a duty owed by one living being to another. The Missouri River is one such non-human relative who is alive, and who is also of the Mini Oyade, the Water Nation. Nothing owns her, and therefore she cannot be sold or alienated like a piece of property. How could one sell a relative? In none of these games do we consider the notion that the land may have a right to itself, or that we owe something to it. The nature of games, which tend to emphasize the player's perspective and center them in the world, means that these kinds of worldviews are rarely represented through mechanics. It's easier to build a game in which the player is an active force shaping the world, rather than a co-equal inhabitant of the world. However, it's telling that games which aim for a deliberately escapist, unchallenging experience still model a conflict between the player and the natural world, in which the natural world offers no resistance, rather than one in which it and the player engage in collaboration. Animal Crossing's gradual refinement into a game of comfort and softness has come at the expense of a sense of harmony, at the cost of making the player character more separate from the world they inhabit. But this type of anthropocentrism has always been fundamental to the series, and to the broader genre as a whole. Even beyond the notion of land use and resource extraction, there's a bias in how the world in an unexploited and uncategorized state is considered within the mechanics of these games. In Stardew Valley, for instance, you help to save a small-town community center by growing and collecting plants, minerals, and fish from an ordered list. From a gameplay standpoint, this provides structure and long-term goals, but the broader implications of this are that you are guided to relax in ways that are productive, and to transform the wilderness of your abandoned farm not just into agriculture, but into agriculture aimed at specific, categorizable goals. Without player interaction, the world is both idle and disordered, but direct human involvement shapes nature from a state of disorganized stasis into something with meaning. There's probably no better example of this in Animal Crossing than fishing. You see a shape in the water, you can likely guess from the time of day, the season, and the size what kind of fish it is, but you don't have hard data. You catch it, and if you're successful, you now have a fish that you've identified by species and measured by size. You then take it to the museum, where, if it's the first of its kind that you found, it will be cataloged and displayed, along with some scientific information. At every step of this process, the fish itself has become, within the logic of the game, more detailed, moving from a shape in nature to something actually placed within the scientific framework. Not only does the fish exist for the sake of the human player character, rather than for its own sake or for that of its ecosystem, but its primary purpose is to serve as a subject of rational and objective knowledge. It doesn't truly exist within the world in a complete and permanent way until it has been removed from nature, evaluated by an expert, and placed within an academic context. The fish cannot be understood when seen in nature. It can only be truly understood in an aquarium. Again, we see an ideology presented as status quo. Science, particularly modern science drawing from a Western tradition, all those names are in Latin after all, presented as the logical endpoint in a process of refined knowledge, rationalism and measurement used to give meaning to nature that would otherwise have none. The process by which these games address exploration and learning is rooted in a view of science as static truth to be uncovered, existing knowledge treated like empty display cases which the undiscovered world can be slotted into. However, science is not a rational entity which exists outside of us, but a constantly changing tool. As self-described epistemological anarchist Paul Feyerabend wrote, "The idea of a method that contains firm, unchanging, and absolutely binding principles for conducting the business of science meets considerable difficulty when confronted with the results of historical research. We find, then, that there is not a single rule, however plausible and however firmly grounded in epistemology, that is not violated at some time or other. Knowledge so conceived is not a series of self-consistent theories that converges towards an ideal view. It is not a gradual approach to the truth. It is rather an increasing ocean of mutually incompatible alternatives, each single theory, each fairy tale, each myth that is a part of the collection, forcing the others into greater articulation and all of them contributing, via this process of competition, to the development of our consciousness. Nothing is ever settled, no view can ever be omitted from a comprehensive account." Part of the comfort of these games is the sense they give us that science, that understanding, is a settled matter, that establishing our power over the natural world means bringing that world into the scope of what is known and quantifiable. Just as you, the human being, are set apart from that world, so too is the conventional mainstream of human knowledge. You will give the land use, and that knowledge will give it meaning. Because the knowledge you are discovering is baked into the game itself, it is unquestionable, it cannot be contradicted, and it will never be wrong. It is not a matter of experimentation and debate, but of discovery. No one in Animal Crossing will ever put together a fossil backwards, no form of life will be discovered that challenges existing taxonomies. In Satisfactory, you don't perform science as an action. You collect something from the wilderness, place it in a machine that analyzes it, and then learn in what manner it can be made useful to you. In No Man's Sky, this notion of science takes the form of the scanner, an objective, rational, unfeeling eye which highlights which things in the universe have a practical use. As Feyerabend writes again, Even an objective enterprise like science, which apparently reveals nature as she is in herself, intervenes, eliminates, enlarges, produces, and codifies the results in a severely standardized way. As with having power over nature, this makes sense from a gameplay perspective. It gives a feeling of accomplishment and growing familiarity with the world, and it provides the player with goals. But in this portrayal of science, analysis, and discovery as objective lenses which exist apart from our own perspective, it's not hard to see the same ideology that privileges academic consensus over people's lived experiences, or the repeated ways in which science has been used to lend an image of objectivity to judgments over what knowledge is or is not valuable. When Animal Crossing treats the academic knowledge of a fish or fossil as the indisputable metric that gives it meaning, it reveals the values that we treat as normal, and it says something about how science is used to create an image of objective authority and to reassure us that the status quo we inhabit is natural. All of these elements combine to create a very specific way that these games treat their spaces, as something of a terra nullius, a nobody's land that exists to be used as a playground that, just as colonized lands are imagined by their colonizers, was waiting for you to come along and exploit it to its full potential. It suggests that the comforting elements of them aren't simply the low-stakes gameplay or the soothing music, but the notion of a world in which not only do you, the player, always represented as either a faceless avatar or a custom-made player stand-in, matter, but you are the only living being who does. In Animal Crossing, the game famously plays itself while you're not there.
Welcome to Animal Crossing, the live game that's happening every minute of every day, whether you're playing or not.
Time passes, villagers come and go, flowers die, villagers send letters and change their decorations. But the game doesn't play in the way that you do. Villagers will not contribute specimens to the museum, they will not plant new trees, they will not propose civic works projects. The human is an outsider who disrupts a natural order that would be static and unchanging forever. In Stardew Valley, none of the other townspeople will do anything to restore their community without your prompting. In Minecraft, there are other nominally sentient, self-interested beings, but they are not human and they will not explore, mine, or build. In Animal Crossing, the advancement of science, the ability to bring the world within academic understanding, is limited to the game's sole human character. In other games, centering this much agency on the player is justified because they are the protagonist of a narrative and typically responsible for its inciting incident. It doesn't matter, for example, that Doomguy exerts more power and influence on his world than any other character, because the fact that he is an unstoppable killing machine is what drives the narrative, and he acts in opposition to other forces of change and agency. In Animal Crossing, though, you are supposed to be an ordinary person within the world. Rather than seeing the world through the perspective of its most important character, that character becomes the agent of change solely because they are the player's perspective. The world existed before you, and it will exist after you, but only when you are there does it live up to its potential. The localizing of agency within the player character, combined with the game's emphasis on resource extraction and dominance over nature, results in a sort of cuddly colonialism, a sense that the world had no meaningful history and its inhabitants had no meaningful lives, until you came along to take advantage of the world in a way its inhabitants were unable to. Animal Crossing New Horizons presents you with a deserted island and never asks why it was deserted, why you and only you seem to find it a worthwhile place to live, and then presents it as land whose sole purpose is to be changed and developed into a space suited to your wants and needs. This game design decision is not evil, it is not inherently wrong. I'm not here to cancel Animal Crossing, but the fact that we find this comforting and relaxing helps us consider what we find to be normal. It's common to talk about these games as an escape from obligation, but I think there's more obligations than just bills and jobs we're escaping from. There's an obligation to land, to the ecosystem, to other people in the way their goals contradict ours. There's a moral obligation to consider other viewpoints and engage in doubt and questioning regarding our own. At their core, these chill games are about a type of play acting. but the play they present still has rules, and those rules are based on the ones that we also follow in the modern, developed world. It starts with a set of assumptions about how the world, land, property, nature, science, and society work, but those assumptions are still present, and the fact that we find the game so comforting and so unchallenging should lead us to consider how deeply we've normalized those assumptions as truth. I love Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley, and plenty of other games in this whole sort of nebulous genre. I think they're great, and in some cases I think they've genuinely done me measurable good as a person. But I don't think they're apolitical. I don't think any game in which the primary means of interaction are agriculture, resource extraction, and land management can be apolitical, because these are things that can only be discussed and navigated within political mindsets. My point here is not to say that Animal Crossing is colonialist propaganda or capitalist brainwashing, or that it actively advances any specific ideology. My point is that its focus on a sense of comforting normalcy allows us to see what already existing ideologies we view as comforting and normal. So, to bring this back to those eternal questions, Tom Nook isn't a capitalist. He isn't a landlord. He isn't a settler. He's a little magical raccoon, and he just wants to help you live a nice and ordinary life. And what constitutes an ordinary life is a much bigger and more interesting question than whether that friendly raccoon happens to be good or bad.